Is Joe on with us?
Hey, Matt. How are you, buddy?
Good. Oh, dear. This is going to be disappointing, isn't it?
Hold on.
Welcome to the Lost in Transition podcast. I am your host, Chris Gerard. That was Matt Dixon, his athlete Joe Hicks joining us on the podcast this week. Matt, of course, with Purple Patch Fitness, very well known in the triathlon community for quite a few years now. You might have heard some of his pro athletes, including Jesse Thomas. He's out in Kona right now. Tim Reed, also 70.3 phenomenal athlete on the Purple Patch squad. Some up-and-coming pros and amateurs as well, like Joe from our very own backyard here in Knoxville, Tennessee. So we're going to have a fun time talking to both of them today. Matt's upcoming book is The Fast Track Triathlete, exploring how triathletes can kind of have it all and fit training for a 70.3 or a full into their busy lifestyle. Matt works out in the Bay Area and works with quite a few Fortune 500 execs that do triathlon. And of course, they're not putting in 25 hours a week. There is no way they could do that with their schedules. And that was kind of one of the motivators behind writing this book. So we'll talk a little bit about his training philosophy and the book, which is releasing this weekend. Definitely check out purplepatchfitness.com for all the details and to buy a signed copy of that book. And we'll also have details on how you can win a copy of the Fast Track Triathlete. We'll be giving that away on our social media over the weekend here. Without further ado, Matt Dixon and his athlete Joe Hicks on the podcast next. Matt Dixon is the founder of Purple Patch, using his education and experience as an elite swimmer and pro triathlete to bring a broader and more adaptive view of the path to peak performance. His work has appeared in many publications, including Triathlete Magazine, USA Triathlon, Outside Magazine, and Power Tap. He's the author of The Well-Built Triathlete and the brand new book, Fast Track Triathlete, a guide for those who want to compete in long races while still having a life. We're also joined by Farragut resident Joseph Hicks, one of many in the Knoxville area, who's recognized as the always smiling and very speedy member of the Podium Racing Team, sponsor of the Knox Velo and Hicks Chicks cycling teams, and a successful orthodontist and member of Purple Patch since 2016. And Matt and Joe, both welcome to Lost in Transition.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah.
So the book Fast Track Triathlete, we are very close to this dropping. In fact, when this podcast is released, I think it'll be out the day after. And the kind of the idea behind this is trying to create plans for people that have very busy schedules. That at least is one of the ways I think it started. Did your low total time training approach come about from working with busy athletes, or was that something that you always just felt was more effective for most athletes?
Well, I think it's, and you know, you sort of said trying to. I think the first thing I want to start with is this is not really theory. This is methodology. It's proven. You know, we've had a lot of success with this approach. But one of my beliefs in coaching is to try and share, to try and help people solve problems. And so if I feel like I found a solution for this population, people that are time starved, I'm going to share it. And that was really the sort of genesis of writing the book. But the belief in the backbone of this methodology that then has become now the Purple Patch methodology, and hence the Fast Track Triathlete book, was really looking at very, very different people that I coach. I obviously coach my squad of professional athletes, and their goal is unapologetically world-class performance. And so for that population, elite athletes, all of their life is wrapped around sports performance, eating, sleeping, training, and the rest of life is suppressed. But what I saw and what I actually lived is when I looked at the vast majority of athletes that are competing in this sport, endurance sports in general, I feel like people have non-negotiable factors in life where they must perform, and that's their health, their work, their life, their relationships, family, etc. And I saw so many people in starting to help athletes now 10 years ago, where they were chasing their aspirational dreams as triathletes, but at the cost of those, what in my mind are non-negotiables, health, family, work, etc. And so I started trying to think outside of the box and go about it from what I would think is a more pragmatic mindset. How do we actually solve the challenge of creating results athletically, but not at the cost of those other factors? And so that was the genesis of the book. And we put it into action. Very much the majority of purple patch athletes that we work with are very busy, and we've had great results. So I felt like it was time to share.
So Matt, where did this more is better training approach come from? Because we hear this a lot and we see, people think, I'm going to do an Ironman. I need to figure out how to get 25 hours a week because that's the way to do it.
Well, I think it's somewhat from the original relics of the sport. If you think about how the sport started, it was a combination of swimming, cycling, and running. And some of the legends in the sport said, okay, if a elite swimmer swims X and a professional cyclist rides Y and a professional runner runs Z miles a week, if I combine them all together, I'm going to be a great triathlete. And some of them were, and they did. But it's also a sport that is, from a brand standpoint, from an aspirational standpoint, is a great human challenge. So the sport lends itself to that. Unfortunately, when we apply that in the context of a busy life, it becomes unsustainable. The other thing that happens is, and that's how I think the dogma, so much of the coaching methodology and the planning methodology started, was in that history of the sport. But there's also a fear component to it as well. There's also a worry. The biggest worry for many athletes is, can I do this? Can I do this successfully? And am I going to be able to swim, then bike, then run without running out of puff? And so there's a fear-based component. And the barometer of success, traditionally, of training success is the accumulation of training hours. But that just becomes unsustainable within context of a busy life. And so I think that's some of the history, and it's led to, in my mind, a series of underperformance relative to the effort that people are putting into the sport, or people are arriving at races where they're very fit, but they've gone through so many cycles of sickness, of injury, of fatigue, that ultimately they're not enjoying the sport as well. It becomes a shackle, it becomes a strain on their family, it becomes a strain on themselves. And so I think that it's time for us to evolve and shift our lens on what is smart and pragmatic training.
A lot of folks then, will think of, when they think of volume, they think, well, if I just reduce volume, then I just ramp up intensity, sort of as a counterbalance. So when you're dealing with a low training time athlete, how do you feel about, do you ramp up, intensity as the volume drops off, or do you keep it at the same proportions? How do you bring somebody over to that and balance that intensity and volume?
Before we sort of just jump into the algorithm, as it were, which I'll talk about, I think it's first important for us to establish what effective training is. And if we think about why we train, any athlete, it doesn't matter whether you're world class, it doesn't matter whether you're time staff. The reason we train is to prepare our bodies for racing. Now, there's a bunch of other good benefits from it. Improves critical thinking. If it's done effectively, it improves your fitness, you get stronger. But from a sporting standpoint, we train to prepare for races. And effective training is applying a training stress while achieving a positive adaptation. And that's the most important mindset for anyone approaching the sport who has competing demands of life and their goals and aspirations in the sport. So with that in mind, rather than, the first thing that I like to see is, rather than start to say, okay, I'm going to reduce training hours, done. Well, for someone that has a lot of time, it's okay to fill that time with smart training with more hours. And there might be even periods in life where you have more capacity and you can do more hours. At the same time, life is not static. It's not completely programmable. There are also times where life is flowing and it gets very busy and you have to do less hours. So the call to action in the book and the methodology is not less hours is better. That's important, because otherwise I would train my professional hours on 10 hours a week and say, there you go, that's your performance. But that's not. They train many more hours because they don't work. So the reason I answer your question like that to start is that I think that's important. The call is not do less hours. The call is do effective training hours that are suitable and sustainable within your life. And then the mission, this is when you get to the intensity question, is how do we maximize those training hours? So there is I believe that in any given block or week of training, there needs to be a divergence of intensity. So you reduce training hours from the mythical 20 hours a week down to 10 hours. There should be more intensity in those 10 hours, but it doesn't mean that every hour is intense. So instead you have key sessions that maybe are on reduced training time overall, and those key sessions have more intensity. But other sessions are supporting, where they can help with recovery, preparation, general endurance, or technical development. And that empowers the athlete to then also, if life gets busy, can scale to say, I'm going to hit the key sessions, the specific ones that are the building blocks of each week or block of training. Or if life gets a little more free and you actually have a few days off work, you can add on duration, you can add on volume, and of course then intensity might drop. And that's sort of the headline news. Obviously the book gets in very simple terms and approachable terms, but gets into the really key specifics.
It's almost as if a triathlon plan for somebody that is not a professional should scale to their real life. It seems simple, but
what a crazy thought, Chris.
I know, it's a radical thought.
If you think about it, I always have this saying, life is not a spreadsheet. And yet, so why do we approach training in a really rigid way? And success or failure is just simply punching the clock. If I do all of my sessions, then I have been successful. But life is dynamic and dirty and wondrous and ebbs and flows, and things get in the way. Life brings rest days. So we need to have a training program that can expand out when you have more time, but can remain specific and effective if you get really restrictive. And by working together, and I'll give you an example, it's why every single session within the training program that's in the book, we have 2 training programs that we included in the book, one for half Ironman and one for Ironman. Every session is scalable, so you can either do the full session or scale it down relative to time restriction or fatigue. And so that empowers the athlete to make smart decisions relative to what's happening in their life. So it's just more of a dynamic, I think, logical response. Is just pragmatic of trying to synchronize, as you say, the training program with life, rather than trying to compete against it and squeeze life into the training program, which is when a lot of athletes get into trouble.
Joe, you're with us here, and how long have you been in the sport, and why? What's the draw of long distance, especially to you? Do you prefer it, or is it just the current challenge you're working on?
I do prefer it. It is more of a challenge in my mind, and so when I started doing triathlons, I did a sprint, as most of us do, and then I enjoyed myself so much, I looked at my wife and I said, well, babe, that was a lot of fun, so what's the biggest? What's the hardest? I want to do that. And she said, well, it's an Ironman. And she kind of laughed. And I said, okay, I'm going to do one. So that was my plan. And about 10 months later, I did my first Ironman. Very poorly, of course.
Before working with Matt, I know you started at 118 pounds, almost more of a Tour de France cyclist, and intended with a higher RPM spinning on the bike, but it kind of also left you vulnerable to some of the demands of triathlon. To be a stronger cyclist, what did some of your training regimen include? I know there was some bike power intervals thrown in there. How did that change, your approach, I guess, to the sport?
Well, coming in, when I first talked with Matt, he said, oh, we got to put some weight on you, Hicks. 118 pounds, all I did was cycle, putting in easily 250 to 300 miles a week. So changing that regimen, changing and adding power programs like lifting weights and changing my diet a little bit. After about a year, maybe less, I've put on about 15 pounds and I'm performing a lot better.
So, Matt, I know Joe mentioned weights there. One thing that you had written, I believe, in a blog post was on the importance of functional strength training. I know a lot of triathletes, even with 20 hours a week, don't bother to do that. But you seem to be advocating certainly it's worth it, even on a low-time plan. What are some of the benefits that people can see beyond, I guess the concept of having a strong core or is just lost on some people, but what are some of the concrete benefits that people see?
Well, I think at the most baseline level, to become a better functioning human being, and everyone just thinks about swimming, biking, and running, but there's wonderful benefits for just being a better functioning human being, especially for people. And think about Joe, that's an orthodontist and spends a lot of time sitting down. So we want him to be a better functioning human being to start. And there are some basic movements. There's also a whole host of very proven, very accepted across 99% of the sports, with triathlon being one of those that's a little bit more polarized, that there are all sorts of performance benefits in synchronization with your endurance training. So it's not a replacement for endurance training. It doesn't help you directly improve more power on the bike, for example, but there is all sorts of neurological benefits from it. It increases the numbers of muscle fibers that you have available for the usable mix, and optimizes the hard work that you're doing in your endurance training. Outside of that, if you become a better functioning human being, you're much less susceptible, at least, to the rigors of injury. It's not a direct correlation, because if you have a bad endurance training program, you have terrible nutrition habits, and you never sleep, you're also at risk of injury and sickness. But it's a big tool in the arsenal to try and reduce injury risk. With a very busy person, we have to accept that it is a critical supplement. So the bullseye is swim, bike, and run, because that's the sport they're getting ready for. So we try and do something small consistently. 15 to 25, maybe 30 minutes a week, a couple of times a week, is important and a great complement to the overall training fabric. And time and time again, people, and Joe being a testament, it really, really helps.
We're watching, as you're talking, Matt, we're seeing Joe nod and smile a lot as you're kind of talking about the different workouts and incorporating the strength training. So I know it's working, and I know Joe's had a lot of success with it. But Joe, I'm curious, what other things have been impacted besides, introducing the strength training and, putting on some weight so you can be more resilient. How about your approach to recovery? How has that shifted since you started working with Purple Patch?
The entire training plan has changed over the past year since I've been with Matt. I'm doing less intensity, and the amount of hours that I'm putting in a week have decreased, but the quality of workouts has gone up tremendously. And as he said before, they're optional workouts. So this weekend, I'll give you a perfect example. I had a huge running block this weekend, and Matt knew going into the weekend that I was going to be out of town, and he set up a perfect running block, but gave me an option one afternoon to hit an extra 40-minute run, very low intensity, but family got in the way. We were visiting my oldest son in Colorado in college, so I skipped that, and I did not get 3 lashes across the back because I missed that, and I'm still a good pupil.
And you're still doing well, and you're, so being able to have those choices, it sounds like you're kind of taking control of your recovery. You're able to measure your own fatigue and make a decision without having to call your coach and say, hey, should I do this or not? Yeah,
great point, Lana. So back to recovery. I can pick and choose, and it has a lot to do with family and work environment. So if I know work's going to be stressful, I'll know that I can recover in my chair in my office, and my legs will be much better on the next day's bike ride or something.
The one thing I'll go is to Joe's training plan, because he mentioned something there that's quite interesting, where he said the intensity has dropped a little bit. And for a little point of clarification, Joe was hitting intensity almost every day. And so what I try to do is to say, let's actually polarized a little bit. Let's actually give your body to rejuvenate. But when you do hit intensity, let's make it really valuable and really count. And so let's make the key sessions really key, really effective, but allow the body to rejuvenate between. And that's increased his consistency, the magic word in performance, and his predictability of performance. And then those supporting sessions, those optional workouts that are in there, those will never be key sessions, but they're great if you get them in. But that's not the barometer of our success. And so the athlete, I do like the athlete to be empowered to make those decisions relative to life, because the last time I looked, very few triathletes that are choosing to do half Ironman or Ironman are lacking motivation. And so they are not going to be skipping training just because. And so it really helps with the understanding the intent and their application, but they don't feel guilt or a failure because that workout didn't happen.
Well, that's such an important point too, because I think there's something strange about the endurance sport community. So many are driven type A sort of people, and they expect so much out of themselves. Triathlon, endurance sport can do such wonders for people's physical and mental health. At the same time, it can completely tear them down. And we can track some aspects of training fatigue, directly training related fatigue, using something like Training Peaks or something like that. But it does not show the complete picture. You mentioned life stress is a big role in that. How do you like to go about coaching your athletes to kind of start recognizing some of that life stress that they have and be able to kind of chill a little bit? I mean, you're dealing, I know, with a lot of CEOs out there in the Bay Area. These are not people stereotypically that like to relax.
No, and I mean, it's a great point. You talk about tracking training load. I was actually just at lunch with one of the founders of Training Peaks, and we were talking about TSS, their famous tracking of training load. And we were laughing, and it's a challenge for them because it's a wonderful tool. It's great to track training load. Nothing wrong with it at all, but it doesn't give you the overall picture. And so we have to always be cognizant of the undeniable influence of life stress, lack of sleep, looming deadline, travel across country with work, family stress, whatever it might be. And it starts with education. And so the key thing, and it's a process, and this is, I've spent a lot of time with this in the Fast Track Triathlete, defining the lens that an athlete is looking at themselves and their training through, and defining the intent and ensuring that the athlete understands what we're trying to get out of it. And that's the first thing that is really important. You can't just blindly follow a training program. As an athlete, you have to have a little bit of self-ownership. It doesn't matter if you're coached by the best coach in the world with the biggest reputation, there is still ownership that's necessary. And so I see it as my job is to educate on the intent of the training, empower the athlete to understand what we're looking to achieve out of it, and shift their barometers of success. And we sort of alluded to it, not being overly obsessed with total hours per week, not making sure we check every box, and then supporting that training approach with really good habits, good sleep, good nutrition, strength and condition we sort of covered off on. And it's never I understand it logically, therefore I'm cured. It's, I understand it logically, now let's put it into action. And after 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, hopefully not 6 months, but sometimes it takes that long, when they feel it, when they feel consistency, they have less deviations in energy. They are sustainable. It doesn't feel like a monkey on the back. They get this internal reward. Oh, I'm actually riding well, almost by surprise. I don't have this looming fatigue, but I'm riding well and I can perform. And maybe it's a great question for Joe of his experience, but the sustainability side is the reward of the application.
Indeed. Just following the training plan and making the box turn green and trying to please your coach that you did the workout is not the right way to approach that. Matt is constantly asking, okay, you did the workout, but how did you feel? can you give me some feedback on your feeling? I see that you did it. Give me some verbiage with that. And I think that's a good way to approach a training plan, especially with Matt.
Was that a change for you, Joe, to provide that kind of feedback? I don't know if you had been coached in the past, but was that a change for you to actually have that sort of interaction and get the feedback going?
Well, I've never had a coach, and that's the first thing Matt and I talked about. He was pleased that, okay, you're coming to me raw. And I'm like, yes, I am. I don't know really what I'm doing, but I will follow the training plan and give you the type of feedback that you're asking for. And I think through that has made me a better athlete, because Matt knows me now, and we've been together for about a year. So the way he sets up my training plan, obviously it works very well around my family and work schedule, but he puts the intensity where it needs to be. He knows when I need to recover, and through the feedback, which no, I've never done that before, has I think all in all has made me a better athlete.
And Matt, I'm curious, what kind of tips would you have for, we have a lot of age group athletes listening. You may have coaches or may not. What are some ways that our listeners can either give better feedback or even kind of ask themselves, what questions should they be asking themselves when they're following a training plan to know how to make adjustments or changes?
It's a great question, and I think that the most important thing is, on a daily basis, actually stop and ask a question: how do I feel? In today's busy life, just that simple act is really important. A little bit of stepping back. How do I feel today? And in fact, still the most scientifically valid, bizarrely, it's the most scientifically valid measurement of readiness to train is a simple: how hard was the last workout and how do I feel? It spread over a long period of time. It's actually really empowering for coach and for athlete. So we are obsessed. We all understand there's plenty of objective data gathering devices. So whether it's through a Training Peaks where you're tracking TSS and other factors like that, or it's just simply looking at power meters, heart rate, GPS, etc. All of that is really good. But the subjective data that comes with it, how do I feel? What do I have going on? Was it harder than I thought? How's my fatigue? That should become really important in the conversation as well. And so often we rely on data to try and solve our problem, when so often data is valuable, but in conjunction with the subjective feedback is really important.
And how would that apply when you think about something like nutrition? Obviously, you could objectively collect how many calories and how many grams of fat you ate every day, and MyFitnessPal, and watch that. But what kind of things do you see with athletes about nutrition? What are they doing to get it right, and what do you see as some kind of common mistakes in that area?
Everything in moderation, including excess. It's and I say that because I including my professional athletes, I never ever have athletes make it emotional, so we don't count calories, we aren't obsessive. Instead, we try and put in some really important basic habits that are sustainable. And I think that starts with, number one, there are two things in my world with consumption of calories. There's fueling, which are the calories that we consume during and immediately following a workout or a race. And there's nutrition, which is your breakfast, lunch, dinners, and snacks, your platform of healthy eating. For an athlete, it starts with fueling. And the number one mistake that I see endurance athletes make is not consuming calories immediately following a workout. And 90% of the time it can be real food. It doesn't need to be engineered, doesn't need to be full of supplements. Eat really healthy, real food after every workout. That's a great habit for a lot of reasons. Helps promote recovery, helps replenish stores, helps limit physiological stress that we've elicited importantly in training, but for the rest of the day, we don't want to have that stress carrying over. And it helps prevent athletic starvation, as I call it, huge hunger signals when you get into depletion because you get very, very hungry. So if there's a number one habit, it's post-workout fueling. And then outside of that, have a really balanced diet with plenty of protein, plenty of fat, plenty of vegetables and fruits, and a little bit of starchy carbohydrate to support the training. And it doesn't get more complicated than that. And but the obsession over counting calories and things like that is just an overcomplication of something that just drives athletes crazy.
So, Joe, we mentioned that one of your things was actually to put on some functional weight to be able to add a little bit more power to your routine and then just have the endurance to go with it. How did your diet change in order to gain and maintain a healthy weight for the sport?
How much time do you have?
You didn't just stuff face. Come on.
You didn't get there by cake.
Yeah. So a classic example, this is pre-Matt. This is back in cycling days. I would get up early and grab a banana, a couple of power bars, stick it in my jersey. I'm 25, 30 miles in before I ever have my first bite. Yeah, I just
I'm not hungry yet.
I'm not hungry yet.
Of course.
Yeah, a cup of coffee, I'm good. So, and then coming back after a 150-mile bike ride or whatever it may be, sure, I'd grab a sandwich. Well, that's completely changed now. And before I go out to exercise, I'm eating probably 400 to 500 calories. And then Matt's taught me to eat and drink during the workout, how crucial that is. And immediately after the workout, it's every time, no matter what the intensity level was, it's a protein shake and some fruit.
So you've seen a lot of gains over the past year. I know Santa Rosa, 70.3, Muncie, Augusta. How did those races unfold, and how specifically could you tell the difference that the Purple Patch training made in your strategy and execution of those races?
Well, to be honest, Chris, I never knew I was getting better. That was the whole concept. I didn't know I was getting better. I thought that I'm the same person I've always been, and I just felt more relaxed, and I felt more rested going into a race. And I saw the times, I saw the numbers coming down, and I had no idea what I was going to be doing in Augusta. I just went down because Matt said it would be a good thing to do before Ironman Florida, which is coming up in 3 weeks. So I went down feeling quite strong, and Matt and I had this conversation. He said, have confidence. Just believe in yourself going down because you've got the fitness. And I said, I don't know, Matt. I'll go down and have fun. So sure enough, I PR'd on the swim, had an incredible bike, and of course the heat kept the run from being a PR, but I had the fitness I didn't know I had. And then looking back, which my first race of the year, first half, was Santa Rosa, solid race, and then went to Muncie and PR'd in Muncie. And just a perfect example where Matt brought me over a year. I did Muncie in 2016, and the same course, same conditions a year later, and I knocked 20 minutes off that time. Huge PR for me. So going into Augusta, I PR'd by another 8 minutes, and those 8 minutes got the slot into the World Championship next year.
And that's coming up, of course, in South Africa. That's going to be quite a bunch of fun. Anything else in the works for you? Ironman Florida is also coming up here in a few weeks.
Well, that's what Matt and I talked about in our last conversation, was the 2018 calendar, because after Ironman Florida, we're going to start focusing on the calendar that surrounds South Africa. And that's in September, so we've picked a couple of different half Ironmans, and we're going to do one full next year as well.
So I'm curious, Matt, what does it look like for Joe for his off season, his out season? I mean, are there going to be specific focuses, or does it just kind of a different flavor of what he's been doing so far this year?
Well, I think because it's Joe, I'll let him have the day off after Florida, but then it's right back to 4 reps on the run.
Oh, I get a rest day. That's my first in a while.
Laziness will not be tolerated, but. No, I think the important thing for every athlete is to have some downtime emotionally, especially after a long season. And Joe's been very, very consistent. We knew that his Ironman was late in the year, Florida. So he's very consistent throughout the year, but I already asked him in the middle of the season to take a pretty good break. And secondly, I was really I really honed in on the importance of not being overly obsessive or focused to Florida until 10 weeks out or so. And I said, okay, now your Ironman hat is on. So before that, we had the luxury of not really thinking about this Ironman. Once he's finished with this Ironman, I want him to take a couple of really unstructured weeks. And that doesn't mean that he has to become a couch potato, but he can be really active. He can go and hike, he could go and ride his mountain bike, he could go and ride his road bike with his buddies, but he's not training. And there's an emotional detachment. After that, then, I think the most important thing is a global recycling with evolution of the general master plan. And so often the first time you go through a cycle of work, which is a season, you have some initial ramp-ups and improvements. But the second time, where you have wisdom of the flow of a season, wisdom of the methodology and where it fits on the journey, you're able to execute better. So it might be a little bit more challenging next year because he's evolved as an athlete and he understands when to push and when to hold back. But the biggest phase, the immediate phase after his couple of weeks of break, will be go into what we call post-season, which is an absolutely critical phase of training for every athlete, which is low physical stress, but it's preparatory. So we want to do a big emphasis on technical development, and then lower stress training that's still really important to strengthen the connective tissues, muscles, tendons, ligaments, to be prepared to absorb very hard work when it comes into January, February time, that we're actually say, okay, let's now build the endurance and the fitness and the speed and the power for 2018. So that next block of a couple of months for Joseph will be a good time for emotional focus on technical, but less overall load and fatigue accumulation.
And would you recommend that, when I think about our listeners who don't have the luxury of being able to call you up and say, hey, what do I do next? What kind of questions should they be asking themselves as they're, finishing up their race seasons, just like Joseph, and they're saying, hey, what do I do now? What kind of things do you recommend to them to either ask themselves or look at to determine how to spend these next few months in a quality way?
Well, I think that we should never undervalue or underestimate the value of avoiding doing nothing. And if I look at the biggest predictor of athletes making a big leap forward in their performance, the one thing that is always there is some form of consistency and specific training in the what many people call off-season. But triathletes tend to have this all or nothing approach. Training is either on and it's really hard, or it's off. I think in off-season, or what we call post-season, it's really critical for an athlete, if they really want to sort of proverbially take their performance to the next level, there's some really important stuff to be done. But you can go and do some fun trail running, you can do some mountain biking, you can do some hiking and some other things outside. But I think it's a great time to do some specific training to develop the tendons, muscles, and ligaments to be ready to absorb training that's upcoming and hard, instead of taking a break, becoming relatively inactive for 2 to 3 months, and then hitting the new year and saying, oh, goodness me, I've signed up for Ironman Lake Placid, I better get training. Because what happens there is that the time that you want to be effectively training, you're playing catch up. And typically, we don't have the best patience in the world. We accelerate too quickly because we're already behind the 8 ball and we panic. And that's when injuries occur. That's when sickness occurs in the spring and everything else. And it's because they're rushed in the process. And so if you want to move forward in the season, while it's not the glory time, the post-season or off-season is the really critical time to do less hours, but very specific hours that can lay the bedrock so that you can actually go and perform really well in the training later in the year.
Once again, it kind of brings it back to consistency and part of the point of the lower volume training plans in the new book, Fast Track Triathlete. And that is releasing this weekend right in conjunction with Kona, correct?
It is indeed, yeah.
Excellent. And people can get that, I believe, through your website, purplepatchfitness.com.
They can, yeah. And if they actually order it through the website, the unfortunate byproduct is I will sign it for them, so whether they want that or not. But the other thing on the as a part of the book is I believe in education so much, and sometimes there's only so much you can get into a book. And so one of the things that we offer is once you finish reading the book, you can actually, or in parallel, in conjunction, you can actually have free access to our education program. It's typically $25 a month, and we have a lot of content, a lot of education, and a deeper dive into so much of the stuff that we talk about in the book. But that's available for fast-track readers. So purchase it through there, and we'll get you engaged in the education program. Lots of videos, PDFs, podcasts, and things like that.
That's awesome. We'll post that link up in the show notes for sure, and then I know folks can find you on social media. It looks like Facebook and Twitter, all the usual places.
All the usual, absolutely.
Exactly. And glad to have you with us again. I know you're out in Kona this week, and any predictions for the big race?
It's going to be very, very hard for all of the athletes, and some of them will do very, very well.
That is the most accurate Kona prediction I've heard yet.
I always get asked who's going to win, and when you have athletes racing, it's an impossible answer. But I will say that it's a wonderful occasion every year, and for those athletes that are here, I hope that they all have some gratitude of being healthy and on the island and being able to participate in what is a magical event. And I hope everyone, not just Purple Patch athletes, I hope everyone has a terrific day, because it's a great event in the calendar of our sport.
Matt Dixon, thanks so much for joining us on the Lost in Transition podcast. All the best to you and your athletes in Kona.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Our thanks again to Matt Dixon and Joe Hicks for joining us on the show this week. And if you want to win a copy of Matt's new book, The Fast Track Triathlete, just check out our Facebook and Twitter accounts. Running contests there as usual. Your details to enter and win will be there. We'll run the contest through early next week, probably Monday around midday. Just go ahead and jump on that if you're catching this in your feed. And so you don't miss the show, remember to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, the TuneIn Radio app. Available on YouTube. You can stream it on Facebook. You can stream it at losttransition.com. And follow us on social media. Connect with us and let us know who you'd like to hear on some upcoming shows. We've got a good schedule coming up, and we'd love to hear who you would like to hear from. We'll go out and see if they're available. Just send us an email from losttransition.com or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. We'll talk to you again soon. For Lana Burl, Joe Hicks, and Matt Dixon, I'm Chris Gerard. May all your transitions be smooth.